Texas represents leadership, hope, patriotism, and pride. It's a place where people of all cultures and creeds live, work, and raise their families together. It's a place full of opportunity. Unfortunately, under Republican control, Texas is going backward. That trend is coming to an end. It's time for a new vision in Texas. I am running for Texas Controller because I want to be part of the new generations of leaders who will bring Texas back to the 21st century and position it for a strong future. I am committed to a transparent tax administration and to establishing a vibrant economy with thriving jobs, so you can provide for your family and maintain a healthy life balance. You deserve an inclusive Texas, a Texas that embraces diversity, where no matter where you were born, the color of your skin, or the language you speak, you are welcome. You deserve a Texas that treats women equally in all areas, including equal pay and the right to make their own medical decisions. You deserve a Texas that recognizes that love is love. A Texas where all faiths, traditions are welcome, and where church and state are truly separating governmental decisions. A Texas that welcomes new business ventures and give employees the right to organize and unionize. A Texas that respects and embraces data and science, where government leaders do their elected jobs of working for the best interests of all Texans, not special interest groups. A Texas that guarantees easy access to voting for all citizens. You deserve a Texas that repeals race suppression, where no matter your zip code, you will have access to health care, clean water, electricity, high-speed internet, and excellent education, and the resources to support your family. You deserve a Texas where you feel safe in our cities and towns, as well as in your own home. That Texas is possible with new leadership. I am running for office because it's time to bring this new vision to life. It's time to bring Texas back to the people.
Hello. Welcome to Progressive West Texas, the show where we talk to community members trying to make a positive difference in our area. I'm your host, Cannon Roberts, a Lubbock native and organizer here in West Texas. I'm also on TikTok as West Texas Progressive. You might see where the name of the show comes from. And my goal is to show you a different side of West Texas, a side that you probably don't realize exists, a side that you might think couldn't exist out here. But West Texas is actually a really diverse community. And I want to show you the people that I've been working with for the last 4 years and really help lift up their voices because there is such good work happening here. So each week, I'm going to talk to a leader in our community who is trying to make a difference. And we're going to talk about why they're trying to make that difference and how they're going about it. Then we'll talk to members of the community who are affected by those differences these people are trying to make. And so this week, we're going to talk to Bethany Luna, who is running for school board of Lubbock ISD District 4. Then we're going to be joined by Autry and Victoria. We're going to talk about the issues facing the LGBTQIA community here. It's going to be a good show, so let's not waste any more time and get into it. Let's meet Bethany. Hello, Bethany. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, Cannon. Thanks for having me.
So with me today, I have Bethany Luna. She is running for school board for Lubbock ISD School Board, District 4. And so I asked her to come on and talk about why she's running for office and what she hopes to do. So let's start with that first question, Bethany. Why are you running for office?
Yeah, I get asked that question a lot, and I have a lot of different variations of the same answer. And then today I was sitting with someone, and so this is going to be my first time giving this specific answer. And I actually like it as much as, if not more than any other variation that I've given before. So it's my coach, and her name is Bethany as well, ironically. And she said, we want to get to the deeper why. Like, what is the why of you running? And so we sat and we chatted. And at the end of the day, what it came down to me is two things. One, I have an investment in Lubbock ISD because I have a 6-year-old who will start next year in first grade. And I have a 2-year-old who in a couple of years, we'll be going through Lubbock ISD. And so I have a strong investment in the success of our school district because I'm going to directly benefit from it. The second thing, and this is the part that I really like, is my why is that I believe that every child, every teacher, and every parent has a right to be seen and supported in their authentic and true self. And that it is imperative that we create a culture that allows for children, for parents, and for our staff members to get there. I'm able to create that every day in one-on-one settings in my therapy office. That's actually where I'm shooting from right now. And so I get to do that, but in this setting, I'm able to serve, maybe 30 people a week at the most when I'm really working hard. And running for school board allows me to provide support and safety and protection in the choices that I make and in the conversations that I have at a level that far exceeds. I believe currently right now we have about 27,000 enrollment in Lubbock ISD. And so 30 hours a week to 27,000, right? That's a huge jump. And that's what I want to do. And that's why I'm here.
Excellent. So what are some of the main issues that you're concerned with when it comes to education here in Lubbock?
Sure. So a little bit of background about me. I am a local marriage and family therapist or couple and family therapist. And so essentially I have been working with students and parents since I graduated from tech in really even before graduation, but I graduated in 2013. I came out and initially started working for Lubbock ISD, doing parent coaching for children with developmental delays or disabilities or major behaviors. And what initially I was not going to run on mental health concerns because I'm a therapist and this is what I do all day. And I didn't want it to seem like a gimmick, right? Mm-hmm. But after sitting with so many shareholders and teachers and parents and students, what I've actually heard is that mental health is one of the biggest concerns in our schools right now. We have, students who are threatening to shoot up schools. We have students who are, running out of classrooms, running out of schools. And we have teachers who are trying to manage all of these behaviors with a feeling of a lack of support. And what I know about secondary trauma is anytime that there is a traumatic experience, the person who services the need also can end up with needing some support too. And so, initially that was not the goal. And after so many conversations, I've learned mental health is the main priority. It's a crisis for our students, for our teachers, and we just can't ignore it anymore.
Yeah, no, that is, I think that's really important. And I think bringing your experience and your expertise to the race is a good thing. So I'm glad that you're going there. So it sounds like you have learned quite a bit from listening. So in the time that you've been running and you've been having these meetings, what has changed? What has become maybe more clear in what's happening in Lubbock when it comes to education?
Yeah. So I could take an hour and answer that question. So I'll try to do it very, very succinctly. One of the things that I'm realizing through all of the listening that I've done, I probably sat with about 30 teachers so far. And I have an intention to continue to grow that number up to the hundreds before the actual race occurs. 100, not hundreds, just to be clear. To me, what I've learned is a little bit more about the culture of actually working as a teacher and an administrator in Lubbock ISD. So like I said, I worked for Lubbock ISD in ECI. We were in central office, and so we were addressed a little bit differently. And I have worked alongside teachers in the classroom, managing behaviors with certain kids. and coming and sitting in and going to ARDs and being supportive to parents. So I've done all of that, but I wasn't very familiar with the actual feeling of what it's like to be a teacher right now. And the feeling that I have heard is do more, do more, do more, do more. And there's not much more we can give you while you do it. And sometimes there is beautiful support in administration, and some teachers feel like all of their needs are met. They feel supported, they feel heard, they feel validated. But then I speak to other teachers and it's a very different experience. And so I think for me, what I've learned is the necessity for the culture to be one of service, to be one of listening. And that comes from the top down and the bottom up. So what I view my job as, if I am elected into this office, is to ensure that I'm having those conversations at the board level, and also that I'm open to having those conversations, in a way that students feel heard, in a way that teachers feel heard, recognizing that I'm one person within 7. I cannot change the world. This is a long-term problem, not a short-term fix. But I can sit with people and say, I hear you, tell me more. Like, tell me what you need to be successful as a teacher. And then let's take that to the board and figure out how to help.
Yeah. Excellent.
Yeah.
So you, when we were talking to the other guests who are going to be on in a second, you introduced yourself as a queer woman who is running for office. Most people would probably not expect someone in Lubbock, Texas, to introduce themselves that way. And one thing that I'm hoping the show will do is show a different side of Texas. Why was it important for you to make that a point in your campaign and to introduce yourself like that, rather than what most people expect, which is kind of, hide it, not really talk about it, hope that people ignore it?
Sure. Yeah. So there's sort of twofold, right? Like, one piece of it is my last name is Luna, and I do not look very Latina, depending on where you're at, people sort of like different language there. But I'm very white passing, for lack of a better way to say that. And so I can remember my first day at Lubbock ISD, I walked in and I had my badge and it says Bethany Luna in my face. And people were like, oh, tell me about your husband. And I'm like, no, that's my name. Right. And so, as I decided to run for this office, one of the things that myself and the other people that I'm running with wanted to bring is a sense of diversity and a sense of difference. And it's very easy for people to look at me and assume that I'm married to a Hispanic man and that I'm white, and that I fit the norm. And the reality is I don't. I grew up in a very small town close to here. I was essentially the first openly gay kid in my school. And I experienced a lot of interesting things through that experience. Not all bad. Some were really cool. And some were really not so cool. And I want every single LGBTQIA kid in Lubbock ISD to know that there's someone who looks like them, who understands them, who has a sense of knowing, right? I don't know them individually, but I do know what it is to be a minority in West Texas. And I know what it is to be kicked out of a church and treated differently whenever you come out. And I know what it is to be in a public setting and for people to see me with my daughter and say, oh, where's your husband? Or whenever my daughter says mommy to her, to my wife, that they look really funny when she looks at me and says mama, and I want them to know that they can be successful and life is worth living, and that regardless of what is happening today in school or at home, that there's a reason to keep fighting to get to the next day so that they can get somewhere different in their life for the students who do not have support, right? Which is not true for every student, and I recognize that. But I know I would not be here today if I hadn't had a gay teacher who reached out to me and said, I see you and I know you, and it's going to be okay. Because there were times where it didn't feel like it would be. Right. Which is not something I really talk about a whole lot, honestly.
Yeah. Well, and you know, we had an experience this weekend at the Beto event where there was, I want to call him a kid. You know, he's probably in college, I'm guessing.
He is.
Yeah. So a college student was able to ask Beto a question, and he said, you know, what are you going to do to amplify queer voices? And so I was kind of standing a little bit behind him, and after Beto answered and kind of went on to the next person, I was able to go up and hand him your push card, and I said, this is Bethany. She's a queer woman running for school board. And he got really excited. And I was able to introduce him to you after the event, and he was really excited to meet you. And so, you know, how does representation, like, how do you think, like you kind of already mentioned it, saying that if you didn't have a teacher reach out to you, but how do you think that representation helps even when it's just like you're running, like you don't even have to win, you're just running? How do you think that benefits the community?
Yeah, you know, so I'll speak more from the experiences that I've had in talking with people rather than making assumptions. But I've talked to a couple of people, and actually the thing initially I got a little bit of pushback. People were like, well, don't be too loud, like don't hide it, like don't speak too loud about being gay because you're gonna pull the wrong people and like you'll lose. And I was playing around with the idea of just letting that be, like, okay, I get it, like play the game. And then I called this wonderful woman, and I was asking for a donation, and she had supported the Human Rights Campaign. I won't say her name just to be respectful, but I called her, and I knew she was safe. So I said, hi, I'm Bethany Luna. I wanted to call and ask you for your support. I heard you're a huge supporter of the Human Rights Campaign. I'm a queer woman. I'm running, and, you know, I just want to take care. I want to take care of every child and every teacher. And I want to be intentional for my LGBTQIA plus constituents. And she cried like immediately and said, I just want to thank you so much. I respect your bravery. You're so strong. Like, I can't believe that you're actually willing to do that. Like, and that for me was a shift. And I was like, okay, like this is to me a sign that says, if I'm going to do this, I have to do it all in, like head first. I am gay. I have been gay. I have been loud. I have been strong. And why in the world in this one area am I not going to do that? And so that was really for me, I guess I was like late February that I had that conversation. And that was really whenever everything kind of shifted to being more congruent, right? And in alignment with my day-to-day life, because I have a wife and I have a child that is not biologically mine, you know, and I do have a stepdaughter as well. And no matter, like, I have to live in that. And I hope that if I live in it, other people in West Texas will feel safe enough to live in their truth too.
Awesome. That's a great answer. Well, let's keep talking about representation and bring on our guest.
Okay.
So let's say hello to Victoria and Autry. Thank you all so much for being on. I really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to having this discussion with everyone. Awesome. So let's start by Lubbock and Bethany kind of touched on this. Lubbock kind of gets mislabeled as a monoculture, and people think they understand Lubbock and West Texas. I know that on TikTok, people love to tell me to leave Texas, and that's not always possible. And the fact is, like, I don't want to leave West. I've left West Texas a few times, and I keep coming back for some reason. But one part is, there are things to love out here. And so the first question I want to ask all of you is what about West Texas, or what about Lubbock brings you joy? What is something that you like about Lubbock that, maybe people outside of our area, might not know about? So Bethany, I'm going to let you go first and answer that question.
Sure. Yeah. So there's sort of three parts of this for me. One, what I like about Lubbock is being able to be different than the norm and to do things like providing a service that doesn't feel possible. Back in November, I did an assessment for someone to have gender reassignment surgery, and they said that they had called like 15 people and no one was willing to do it, right? And so I love being in Lubbock and getting to be like a piece of hope in a place that doesn't always feel that way. And I'm not at all the only one, right? And that's the piece that's important, is there are many people here who want to be a beacon of hope for people who feel oppressed. And so you just got to get lucky enough to find us, right? Mm-hmm. But I really appreciate that. And some specific things that I actually like to do here. Like, I love going to La Serena. I love tumbleweed botanicals and the sage and the Palo Santo and the teas. Like, it's just such a fun place. I took my daughter there a couple of weeks ago. I was like, let's get you some crystals. You've been having a bad day. And so that was really fun. And she has her little jade bracelet she wears religiously. Don't get it wet, mama. So, and yeah, I mean, just there's more here than meets the eye. And I really appreciate that about Lubbock.
Yeah. Autrey, what about you?
I really like the thriving art scene. The art scene kind of came up right as I left after high school. But it's changed Lubbock like immeasurably, not only just in the inspiration and the example of healthier outlets than there were available in the 90s, but also just in the infrastructure and just the skill building and just the ability for people to be able to learn a craft here and not have to move away somewhere else to learn those things.
Yeah.
And I really enjoy the challenges that Lubbock offers. It offers a unique opportunity for introspection and spiritual growth, to sort of face discrimination and sort of like a pushback from like the mainstream of the city. A lot of people, as long as there are healthy tools and kind of coping mechanisms to those challenges, it can really foster a lot of spiritual growth. It's like always being questioned and really having to ask yourself those questions like, am I wrong? Like, is it me? It's a lot of just sort of built-in psychological work that you do. And so I think it's not a bad thing to feel that challenge, because a lot of people, when they feel right too much and too often, it's a slippery slope into pretty extreme beliefs.
Yes, I think you might be hinting at what is common in our culture of people thinking they're right too often and not getting that pushback.
Well, so, and there's a lot of like white heteronormative, Christian, sort of like fundamentalism here that maybe doesn't exist in bigger cities and maybe feels a little backwards, as in time even, but it's Lubbock, yeah, it does have a very unique focus on what the word right means.
and we will talk about that more as well. But Victoria, what do you like about Lubbock?
I have a lot of roots planted here. My family is from the area. I can try my best to leave as far as I can go. The farthest I've gone was to Snyder. I went to college at Western Texas College, and I found myself coming back mostly because my roots started with my biological family, and that we're from here, we thrive. But it was also rooted in my drag career that started in 2017. It pulled me back here to start that. And as much as I would like to grow and move from that, it's always a good place to kind of know where you come from. And that's why I enjoy Lubbock, is because of the roots and the family that I've made here, both, my queer family, but also my biological family.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you said something that I think some people might find surprising about Lubbock, is that Lubbock has a drag scene.
Yeah.
And so you're part of that. And can you tell us more? Tell us about Lubbock's drag scene.
Lubbock's drag scene has existed since I believe the late 80s, early 90s. It's always been here. The earliest memory that I can recall was Club Heaven. That location has since not been opened up. The next one would probably be Club Luxor. Since then, we've grown tremendously, not so much in the places and the venues that we get to perform at, but mostly because of the people that we've evolved and let into our groups. We allow, young kids who are about 18, 19 years old who do want to come, perform with us. And I don't believe that was necessarily something super popular back in our early drag days. But, our community here is very small, but it's charismatic, and there's a lot of growth and a lot of, love in that community.
Yeah. And you'll have a lot of events. I've since we've connected on Facebook, I have been surprised to see how many events. There's a lot, but that's good. That's really cool. So okay, so let's get into kind of some of the heavier stuff that we're dealing with, and what we want to talk about. What the LGBTQIA community and the queer community and the trans community is dealing with here locally. Because again, I think in this part, even people in Lubbock would say that community doesn't exist. Like that's not here in Lubbock, and it is. It's everywhere. And so I was doing a little bit of research, and according to a 2021 study by UCLA, by the law school, trans people are 4 times as likely to be victims of violent crime as cisgender people. And even with that kind of extreme number, the media still seems to have a very hard time humanizing the victims, and it's always the perpetrators. And we've kind of seen that in our local media. We recently, there was a murder of Cypress Ramos, and what our local media has done is they seem to focus on the victim, or on the perpetrator, and talking about, well, he was told this from a song. And so I just want to take a moment to focus on the victim. And so, Victoria, you knew Cypress, and so tell us a little bit about who she was.
Me and Cypress weren't necessarily super very close, but as young queer people, we grow up around each other, and I knew Cypress for that reason. Cypress she was beautiful, incredibly beautiful. And from what I knew of Cypress, she was always, smiling, trying to have fun. Just recently, we had her candlelight vigil, and there was a lot of people that I wouldn't have expected to show up, just because she touched a lot of people. Cypress was always the first one to want to get up and dance whenever we were out. She was super charismatic about that. And it's inspiring to know that, people even younger than I am are brave enough to kind of embark through their trans journey and their trans identity, just because it's a lot harder for a lot of people. But overall, she was kind, she was beautiful, and most importantly, she was brave. Even up to her last moments, there was a lot of bravery that came from her. I was lucky enough to know her. I was really lucky enough to know her, and she touched a lot of people. And I know that a lot of the drag community was affected by her loss too.
Yeah. And so why do you think our media, whether you want to talk specifically about the local media or just kind of the bigger idea of media, why does media have such a hard time focusing on the victims and humanizing the trans community or the queer community? Like why? What do you see? Autrey, do you want to take this one first?
Sure. I think in Lubbock in particular, I think there is, well, I'll say first that there's been a lot of progress. When I grew up here, no one stayed. If you were gay, it was very rare for you to stay here. It was always smarter to move to a bigger, safer city to go live in. It, obviously is still very dangerous for trans people here. But back in the 90s, it was very common for, people to be beaten and harassed and threatened. And so I think there's been a lot of progress made. We have a thriving LGBTQIA plus community here, the people that choose to live here, people that choose to come work here, come to school here. And so I think that's a really, important step in the right direction, but we have miles to go. I will say, as far as the media representation here in Lubbock, KCBD did correct the misgendering of Cypress really quickly after it was called out. They were going off of police reports in their initial reporting, and when it was brought to their attention, they very quickly removed all references to gender until they could sort of clear up the information. And so I think that shows a little bit of progress. But the main issue, I think, with Lubbock is that we still have rich, white, old bigots that control the flow of culture and economy. And so while the vast majority of people in Lubbock may be supportive, or at least not have any ill will, they're still placating to old ideas and kind of being controlled by them, and in some ways afraid to have that discrimination turned on them for calling it out and standing up against it.
Yeah. Bethany, right as you take a drink, I'm going to ask you a question. So what, in your experience as, working and counseling community, this community, what do you think that effect is on, young people, whether it's kids in school that you're hoping to help and represent as a school board member, to the adults? What effect does that have? Our media is struggling with that so much.
Yeah, it varies a lot by, how connected people are to media. But I think as a whole, it breeds a sense of hopelessness. If we can't trust our media to keep us safe, to focus on us if we're a victim of a crime, if we can't trust the police, and not to say that they did anything incorrectly, but as a general statement, if we can't trust the people who are meant to keep us safe and report accurately who we are and about us, then why do I trust anyone ever? And I spend a lot of time with people who identify as trans, either in the process of, I know that this is my truth, but I don't know that I can ever say it out loud. And I would say very recently, I have worked with someone for 4 years through huge life transitions. And I very much believe that we get to choose how we present, when we present, where we present. That's our right, to maintain our own safety, in whatever way that means. But this particular individual for 4 years had wanted to share, had wanted to speak out, had wanted to transition, and just didn't feel safe to. And they're moving, and they're going to a place that feels more liberal. And through the process of that move, they've made the choice to go through a name change, start testosterone, and make those changes in their life, right? And so, not to say that this was a direct correlation for that individual, but an experience like misgendering and not being honored as an individual makes it feel less safe to stay, and makes it feel less safe to live authentically who you are. And when we don't do that, it increases suicide rates, it increases depression, it has the potential to increase drug use. All of those things are at greater risk when people are not living joyfully and authentically themselves. Yeah.
So
I'm like, that's depressing.
right. I mean, it is, but I want to talk.
Right?
Sorry, say that again. I think I was
just gonna say it's like it's depressing, and it is our reality, and so continuing to, I'm so grateful to hear that they changed that misgendering quickly, and I think continuing to challenge our media here in Lubbock, and really everyone to be respectful and kind and intentional. Like, that's what we need more of.
Yeah. So one thing that y'all are talking a lot about is safety. And, this might come as a shock, but as a straight white man, I don't think about that a lot. I, even to the point where, on social media and on TikTok, people will tell, oh, you're like, you better watch out. I'm like, look, here's where I hang out. I'm not worried about you. Clearly that is not the experience that everyone has. And I am in a unique place in our society, to be able to live not thinking about that. Where is there a place y'all feel safe? Like, is it in Lubbock? Is it just constant worry, or do you have safe spaces? You don't have to say where they are and give away, all your secrets, but do you feel like you have safety in Lubbock, or is it pretty constant worry? I'll let whoever wants to go first can answer that.
I think the safe spaces in Lubbock have definitely continued to grow. Like I said, there's a reason why in the 20 years since I graduated from high school and left the first time, why there are so many people that are choosing to live here. It is a much different place, and there's, obviously a lot of work to do. I think that, it's one of those things that's also, you spoke to privilege, and, I also share a certain amount of privilege, and, there's intersectional sort of issues that sort of compound, how safe or dangerous, this environment can be for people. And so I think it's just important to continue the work of creating more safe spaces and, even safer spaces than the safe spaces that exist. But I think with the university and with the art scene and like I said, with a sort of quiet majority of people who don't feel discriminatory towards people, and sort of, live their life in a like sort of universal kind of kindness perspective, I think, there are safe spaces. It's just a matter of access to those spaces.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Victoria?
I would like to say, I would love to sit here and say that, we as queer people, but we as also trans people, can always find a safe place. But I also think it depends on who we're trying to keep safety from. Queer people are the first to say how much we, identify equally to each other. Safe spaces for me, I would say that I don't necessarily think about where my safe space is, because I'm always on my toes about whom I can trust and whom's around. And not to say that that's a very pessimistic thing to think about. It's just real. You can be attacked as trans people or as queer people by different trans and queer people. Just recently I was seeing, right before I got on this meeting, actually, I follow a trans woman in Los Angeles, California, who was attacked by another social media influencer at a party. And they're both identified within the LGBTQIA plus spectrum. So it's like, do we even have safe places to, kind of be around our own people? And I do have places where I feel comfortable, mostly with the peers that I have. And I know that, mentally, I will always feel safe within the venues that I perform at as a drag artist. At work, I do work outside of drag. I'm a customer care specialist for Bex's Fiber. We work together, and I'm lucky enough to have that same privilege that Audrey was talking about, to feel comfortable in my own workspace. But I'm always on my toes, just because that's the type of life that trans people, especially trans people of color, have to lead. This narrative has existed since the early 60s, where not necessarily queer people of color, but any person of color is always going to feel on edge, especially in a domain dominated by, heteronormative or even just white people. And that same race war is always going to exist within the queer community as well. So I think when we talk about safe places, is that people will always say, they feel comfortable somewhere. In my opinion, and I don't speak for all trans people of color, but we are always on our toes no matter where we are, because there's always a possibility. And maybe that's just like the negative connotation of that narrative, that maybe this is something that needs to change. Why do trans women or trans people of color always feel unsafe, even in their quote safe places? It can happen anywhere. Trans people of non-color too can also feel that same type of narrative, but it's just really scary to think about. If I go to this safe place, if for example, if I were to go into Club Rewind and do my show, do my performance, and meet these people, will I walk out of there onto the Lubbock Famous Depot District and make it to my car? It's always a narrative that I keep in my head, because I don't want to feel too comfortable enough to lose sight of my own safety.
And that, I mean, and in general, that's not necessarily the safest area in Lubbock for anyone. And so definitely, when you're leaving at night and all that, that makes a lot of sense. So something that has also come up is the religious community here in Lubbock. And Lubbock is very proud of its religious community. And that's where I came from, and I was raised in that sheltered community. And one thing that cities with a lot of churches, one thing that generally happens is those churches often don't get along. And so a lot of our churches here in Lubbock, even though they're very proud of themselves, they disagree with each other on quite a few things. But they all do claim that they do try to love their neighbors as themselves, and they make that claim. But I think one thing that we've seen, especially with the sanctuary city movement and the abortion ban that happened last year, is that to qualify as a neighbor, you have to meet certain requirements. And so what would it look like for our community to love the trans or the queer, the LGBTQIA community? What would that look like? So Bethany or Victoria, either one of you can start. Good question. I know.
That's a good question.
So, because I think one thing that happens is, one thing that I know that happens in Lubbock is that when well-meaning people get involved in some of these communities, they tend to take over. And they tend to come in and kind of colonize. And I've sat in community meetings where, there's these lectures and whatnot. And so, and so that's another aspect of it too, as you're thinking about how, what would loving the trans community look like, but also what would it look like without colonizing that community, without coming in and trying to take over. So both of those are on the table. And Audrey, I know you have thoughts about this. So if you want to go first, you.
Well, I mean, this is kind of a loaded question, and I kind of gave you a pretty heavy answer back when we kind of talked about this. But there is a fine line between sort of good intentions and like responsibility. And so one of the ways that this kind of issue of like kind of colonizing this space is sort of to put the responsibility back onto the oppressed to do the emotion and sort of, you know, hold the hand of the oppressor and sort of walk them through like what, you know, sort of cleaning this mess up or reparation looks like. And so really in my mind, it's about, you know, really sort of focusing less on how you can console victims of things that you see in your community, in the church community, and more about taking responsibility for those things and not using the excuse of, well, you know, I'm one of the good ones, or I have good intentions, so it's not really me, and sort of like, you know, absolving yourself of responsibility, you know, to sort of engage with the church community from within. And so I think that's kind of important to kind of start. But that being said, you know, it's really just about sort of educating people or educating yourself through the process and really engaging the information, and understanding that there is no quick fix. Like in the West, we, especially with sensitive topics, we want like this prescriptive recipe, quick fix, shortcut through difficult and uncomfortable situations and conversations. And so I think really the main thing that you can do is be willing to sit in the unpleasantness of the work and be willing to make the mistakes and acknowledge those mistakes and apologize and move past, you know, and grow that way, and not try to navigate this situation without making any mistakes or without it, you know, being uncomfortable. You have to sort of get in that mess with people. Because, you know, as a trans person, I have gotten really good at navigating the difference between someone who is being malicious and someone who's just being clumsy. And intention really matters. And so you have to sort of give yourself the grace to make mistakes and, you know, be called out for them, and sort of, you know, make that middle ground.
Yeah, I love that answer so much, Autry. And just to like put it into real life practice, right? Like an example of that, my mom goes to a Baptist church, and you know, when my dad died, I was dating someone at the time. We'd been dating for 7 years, and my dad passed away in 2016, just for some time frames, right? And the pastor preached against homosexuality and, you know, sodomy and the sinners and all the fun things that are associated with that. And at my dad's funeral, the obituary read my name, and it read my partner's name as another child, to avoid the discomfort of having to say and deal with the potential backlash from the preacher. And I love my mom. She is so supportive, right? But I think you talk about that responsibility, right? So my mom sat in a church and in a congregation with my dad for 5 or 6 years. No, goodness. 8 or 9 years, listening to someone say that you should get away from the queers and they're going to hell and you need to save them from their sin. And if they will not repent, then you should cut them off. Now, my mom never acted on any of that, right? Like, she still showed up for me. I went to church with her, sat in those sermons. But I think that's an example of what you're talking about. Like, that is my mom complacently accepting pain for me, right?
Well, and she's avoiding pain for herself, because, you know, that's the sort of subconscious like hook for people, is that, you know, as well-intended as people are, they know what sort of hate and like discrimination is being like, you know, thrown at people, and they don't want that thrown at them. And so it's like a self-preservation thing that, you know, she, you know, I'm sure in that moment thought that, you know, that was, you know, the sort of the the peaceful middle ground was to include your partner as just another child, because there is something sort of beautiful about that. Also sort of deceitful in the way that she's like avoiding, like exposing the real truth.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love so much what you had to say, because I think in the moment I was so much in my grief, I didn't even care, and as I look back on that, I'm like, oh, that doesn't feel very nice. That feels kind of terrible, actually. But
and I think it's that sitting in discomfort, and I think people who are in the majority were very good at pushing that on other people. It's everybody else who gets to sit with that discomfort. So Victoria, I wanted to ask you, because some people might watch this and they might hear like, oh, Lubbock has a big drag scene, and that's how we can support. And so there could be that tendency to go and colonize those events and have a bunch of straight, probably white people show up and kind of take that over. So how can they be supportive without kind of taking over or overwhelming?
I think the best way to support is to be just to come and support, but not necessarily take over those events. I think that as queer people, our events, whether it be Pride or even, just a Kiki that we're having on a Saturday night, we hold those very close and very privately, because we've worked really hard to get to do that. And for the longest time, it was ultimately queer people against, straight religious people. So, of course, it's very discomforting for queer people to want to let those type of people in anyway. It's that same guard that I've been talking about of like, can I trust you? And I think a way for religious people to inquire a trust upon them through us would be to be held accountable for their subparts and what they preach against us. It might not be what they believe, but they need to be held accountable for that belief system anyway. Because being held accountable is what's gonna, open up this storyline of, I acknowledge the past, but I am changing the future. Acknowledging the fact that, religious people haven't always been 100% behind the queer community could also lead to that discussion of like, what have queer people endured, and why has that one either led you away from religion or even brought you closer to that religion? I believe religion is also very private, and I know queer people who are super religious and will go to every church function. My drag mom is a super Catholic woman, and she will go to church with her mom every Sunday, most Sundays if her mother is feeling up to it. But she's super religious in that. And I think that what's so beautiful about that experience is that she took something negatively connotated and made it her own. And I think if we're going to invite religious people into our spaces, then we have to be more intimate about it. Every experience that I've had with religious people has unfortunately not been the most welcoming. And I could talk about that all day, every day. But I found peace in myself, maybe not within religion, but the religion of queer people. Which is something we can also talk about. Queer people have created this belief and this religion amongst ourselves, and we feel comfortable in, praising and worshiping in that. These are all, it's not a real religion. We don't, believe in, Lady Gaga or Britney Spears, but
but don't we?
Hello, praise. But it's a belief system in ourselves and within our own community, and so. I mean, it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of progress for religious people to come to our community and openly accept us. Now, there are institutions in Lubbock that have made that progress. The Methodist Church, I believe, on University, right across from the campus, Texas Tech, holds flag meetings. And I was fortunate enough to attend one of those. And it was just really eye-opening to know that a Methodist church was very accepting of holding this type of organizational meeting. And it was lovely to know that. I believe that that's progress. Now, Bethany was talking about growing up in the Baptist church. Same. Yeah, I don't know how far the Baptist church will get to there. I don't even want to think about how long Catholicism will take to, jump on board. But it's interesting to know that there are religious people wanting to take that step. And I think it's also interesting for them to connect with queer people who, have lived through the AIDS crisis and have endured the Trump presidency, who are still enduring the Senator Cruz. Like, these are things that they go through, but they still find that peace and that solace within a religious being. And so maybe religious people can use that and, kind of understand us more in order to be invited within our spaces too.
Well, and to clean up their own spaces, because, there is a growing divide in the religious community from people that actually follow the teachings of Christ and those who are like moving as quickly as they go, a white nationalist, like extreme, sort of situation that's not very safe for anyone. And so I think it's really important now more than ever for people to start, engaging in, loving thy neighbor in action more than words, because it really will help identify who's safe and who's not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The word that came to mind when both of you were talking was worthiness, right? Like how to create safe spaces, how to heal the divide. I think it all comes down to seeing each one of us on this call and each person who looks a little bit different as a worthy human who is equally and equitably deserving of love, of kindness, of all of the exact same things that they see when they look at a cis white person.
Well, and one thing. So one thing I talk to my interns a lot about, and in the organizing work I do, I talk about proximity, which is not something I came up with, but Brian Stevenson talks a lot about, and he talks about how he says that injustice prevails where hopelessness persists. And so in these areas that we have that I think Lubbock for a long time has felt very hopeless, that when that hopelessness prevails, then you have that injustice. And he says that the way to start fixing that is through proximity, is for people who do not have to be in these social situations to put themselves, to choose to be around different people. And so I'm going to tell on myself a little bit, because one of the things that I was kind of putting together as y'all were talking about that discomfort and needing people to take on that discomfort is when I was in college and I would hang out. We're going to get a little local here. I practically lived at Aroma's coffee shop. And that was known as a gay friendly place. Like, that was known. But then me and my straight friends, the only time that we would go to Luxor, which is where, a lot of the people and that hung out there and worked there, like that's where they headed after Aroma's closed. The only times that we would go is when there was a big group of us straight, mostly white people who would go together. And so it was about us making sure we felt comfortable and coming into that community saying, okay, I have my barrier. I'm going to make sure that I feel comfortable. Where we should have been willing to put ourselves in proximity and say, this is something new that I'm going to experience. And rather than make sure I can do it, without feeling that discomfort, we should have put ourselves out there, because that's what the religious community is doing. They're able to stay within their little zones and make themselves feel comfortable. And it seems like that is a lot of kind of. It seems like that is kind of a theme of people need to be willing to become uncomfortable and let themselves feel that way in order to learn and to meet people, because you've all told stories about feeling uncomfortable, and so you don't you kind of don't have a choice for that. Our culture makes sure you feel that way. And so I think one thing that I hope our audience takes away is is that in order to be an ally, if that's still a good term, is you have to be willing to be uncomfortable. And so yeah, and so thinking about being uncomfortable, and Audrey, I'm gonna ask you this question first, because I know you also have an answer for this one. But I had a friend ask me, who's a teacher, and because Bethany is on the school board, I do want to ask this question. I know it's going to have a similar answer to about the asking the oppressed, how to fix the problem. But what can teachers do to help students that are in the queer community or in that community and might not have support elsewhere? What can they do without, I think the way I put it was, how can they do it without being intrusive or too assumptive, but still support those students?
Well, I think it's important to focus on how much we are othering people. I think that the best way, inclusive, especially at an impressionable age where some of these things might, these students might be, exploring, they might be still in sort of a fluid state where they're not quite cemented in certain, on their identity and their sexuality and things. I think that, getting focused on identity is a little bit like putting the cart before the horse. And so my suggestion would be to reduce it down to very simple, golden rule kind of kindness, and really demonstrating as a teacher that, truly everyone is welcome. I think that it's, important to, mark in some way, there's rainbow, sort of symbology is a good sort of signal that you might be a safe space. And I think, being like open to listen and, support students is always good. But I think that it's a slippery slope when identity is too focused on, because it sort of robs the student of the full potential of their sort of identity. You don't want them to be too focused on that being their like distinguishable characteristic. You want it to be something that's like their eye color, or some minor detail about them, and you want the focus to really be providing students with critical thinking skills and access to good coping mechanisms and resources and ways to process so that they're able to sort of write their own story, and really focus on their philosophy and their character. Most of my favorite teachers that I felt really seen by and included with, they didn't really focus on those things about me. They, I'm sure, noticed them, but they never really let that become too dominant in our sort of interactions or discussions. They really focused on my learning, and like I said, making sure that I had coping mechanisms and skills to sort of carve my own path. And they also didn't excuse bad behavior. I know Victoria mentioned earlier that sometimes the experiences from within our own community. And so I think it's important to mention that some of my favorite teachers, because I was being bullied, never excused my bad behavior. And they always made sure that I was focused on my character and not, sort of like this, retaliation, victim kind of, back and forth with bullies. And so I think it's just important to, leave it sort of open. You can, let it be known that you are a safe place for them to come to you, but don't make it too prominent. Just like I said, it's there's something sort of healing about that being like a subtle detail about you. When people don't really react too much in the positive or negative, there's something really calm about that, and it puts people at ease. And so I think it's important to sort of approach it that way.
Yeah. Victoria, what do you think?
I think what makes young people, students, also queer people uncomfortable is that that sudden force of like hello, I also, support your kind. But I mean, me, and my teachers, I can only count on one hand how many teachers have ever made me feel very comfortable about being in their presence. Because although I'm, a Latinx trans drag queen, there's a lot of layers underneath that those teachers chose to explore. They didn't go out of their way to make me feel comfortable just because they knew I was, because I didn't transition when I was in school, but they didn't go out of their way to, make it known that, you're welcome here because you identify under queer culture. Like, that wasn't their narrative. They just wanted me to feel comfortable because they knew that in different classrooms or different, surroundings, I wasn't necessarily comfortable in. I think that the teacher's job is always to make the student comfortable. It's never the student's priority to feel comfortable in a place that they don't. Yeah. And so I think one teacher I can talk about, I think she kind of related to me because she felt my discomfort within herself too. Not necessarily that she was a queer woman, but because she was an eccentric woman. And I grew up in Meadow, Texas, population 535. Same thing with Bethany. I was probably the only queer person up until about 2014. And I was only 16 at that time. So it was kind of hard to deal with. But this teacher in particular noticed me. She brought me into her space. I started doing drag when I was 14. So she kind of understood where my journey was going to go, or at least where it was at that moment. She knew, back then how I identified was, it was comfortable for her to, not necessarily discuss it full on, but she acknowledged it and, treated me better because she knew that there were layers that she was kind of peeling back. After I graduated high school, I went and visited her, and she openly told me that I support you because I know that you and all the things that you endured, you could have sued your high school, you could have sued your school board. There are things that you went through that, queer people don't experience within their 30s. And it's important to know that, I saw that and I accepted it. And if I would have known that that was an option for both you and me, we could have gone down that journey and got you at least more comfort within those realms. Since teaching at that high school, she's moved to Denver, Colorado, which is a huge, step up from at least this area. And even when I, first started my transition about a couple years ago, she was one of the first people to reach out and say, how are you doing? How do you identify now? The pronouns that you use. She made it her priority to kind of step in there and make sure that I'm not overbearing my, support for you, but I just want you to know that I'm only one person, but you can be comfortable around me. And I think that that's what made her a really amazing teacher. Because it wasn't necessarily her doing the same corporate, LGBT brand dealing, hi gay. It wasn't very that. It was more so just I acknowledge you. But she also did the same thing that Autry was talking about. She held me accountable for my wrongs too, because, we as queer people, we tend to retaliate on things that make us uncomfortable. And she made it known that that's a very noble thing to do, but sometimes it's not necessary. And I think that all in all, on this topic of how school systems and how school boards can make their queer students feel comfortable, you can't overbear people with your own support about it, because then it tends to kind of lead people away. No one wants to be included in the space because they're forced to. They want to be included because they feel invited. And so I think me and Autry are kind of on the same page of where we as queer children, we're just trying to find that comfort, and also we're trying to find an invitation to it.
So Bethany, as a school board member, when you win your election,
Yes.
what are you going to do to empower other administrators and teachers to help? And I want to kind of open it up to all marginalized communities. What are you going to do?
Sure. So, I've talked a little bit about culture being top down and bottom up, and I think as a whole, that sense of worthiness and seeing a child, no matter what they look like, where they come from, what school they go to, they are deserving, right? And so I want to be a candidate or an elected member of the board who fights for every single student in Lubbock ISD. And I think we do that through education. I think we do that through having hard conversations behind the scenes. I don't think it's students' job to have those conversations. It's our job as administrators to have professional development for teachers if they feel like they don't understand. You know, it's challenging teachers to look at the student as a whole worthy being rather than, you know, the acronyms that they identify or the color of their skin. It's looking at students as people and not as numbers and funding. I mean, there's so many things that I have to say. But basically, it just boils down to, like, I think what Audrey said earlier, like, you know, the golden rule, like, take care of our kids, you know? I would love to see, in an ideal world, some representation in our teachers. Are we allowing queer teachers to teach at Lubbock ISD? Are we allowing teachers who identify as trans to teach without discrimination, right? So I've had the pleasure of working with some teachers as they go through their transition, and I haven't met one that stayed, right? And how beautiful would it be if our kids, like Audrey said, who are figuring out who they are and exploring and learning, if they had a teacher who they could identify with, like Victoria talked about, like, even if it's not an exact identifier, because that breeds hope, it breeds safety, and it breeds connection. And that's what I think.
Possibility.
Yeah.
And possibility.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's what I think every single student needs, and especially our underserved, our minorities, our marginalized communities. Like, that's what we need in Lubbock ISD, and that's what we should be providing them.
Yeah. Well, and it goes back to that representation, that college student who was so excited that you were running. Like, you know, what would, and I think we hear this a lot we hear this more when people talk about race. And so I see a question a lot on Twitter about, you know, when did you have your first Black male teacher? You know, but that is also important for all kinds of communities and groups. And so we're running out of time here. I do have one last question, then we'll wrap up. And that is very simply, what gives you hope? And that can be locally, it can be nationally. But I do, you know, we've had this has gotten heavy at times, and so I want to end on a positive note. And so, what brings you hope?
So I can answer first.
Yes.
One of the things, you know, let me think about how to put this into words. My apologies. So what brings me hope, actually, I have so much more after running this campaign. I have met so many freaking people who are queer, who are out, who are talking, so many people who are supportive. Like, seeing people support people and treat them like they're worthy, no matter similarities and differences, that's what gives me hope. I'm like, okay, we gonna be all right. We gonna survive today. All right, I like it.
Excellent. What about you, Victoria?
This is super funny, but Whitney Houston talks about it. She said that I believe the children are our future. We teach them well, and then we let them lead the way. I think what's important to know is that I see a lot of hope in young people, but also in children. Here recently, we've been seeing a lot of kids come to our shows. And, you know, in my work life, I'm you know, presenting myself to children who fully understand who I am, because their parents let them. And in my own personal life, I have 5 nieces and nephews, and one on the way. And it took some time for my sister to kind of open them up to like my lifestyle, but it was really important to know about, for them to understand my transition, and seeing my own nieces and nephews and my own children just kind of like open their minds up to our lifestyle, but also to like a more diverse world that's not closed off by Brownfield, Texas, or even Lubbock, Texas. It's amazing. It's almost inspiring for me to keep doing what I'm doing, because if I can at least touch the mind of a young person and make that lasting memory that they can do better things because they saw someone else doing better for themselves. It makes me feel happy knowing that young women and young girls feel beautiful after seeing someone like me. That's where I find my hope, is that in young people, especially children, opening their minds and their head spaces up to us.
Audrey?
Same answer, children. I continue to be inspired by just progress, and maybe some of it is just my age and being able to see progress. I think things are not very linear. Things are kind of cyclic and things come and go, but I think it's like a spiral of growth. And so I do think that in the long run it comes out in the wash that more good happens than bad. And so I think it is very visible in the younger generation, and just how just naturally more inclusive. I think it just goes to show how hate is very learned behavior. And so the more we get that out of the way, the more children are growing up to just be better and better people. And like Bethany mentioned, just sort of common goals, and just being able to work with people for the common good, despite differences. I think that is, very. It's not the most sensational thing to talk about, and so it doesn't really get talked about a lot. But I think that it happens more often than not, and so I think it's really, to see those little markers of progress too, that people find, common ground and serving their community together, and sometimes they're surprised by who they can work with and call friend. And so that's always, hopeful to see.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank y'all so much for being on and for sharing your lives and yourselves and talking about this. I really appreciate it. And I think we've done what I was hoping we could set out to do. And we've shown people a different side of Lubbock and West Texas that they probably didn't know existed or were not as aware of. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
right.
you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
That was a really good conversation. I hope you enjoyed it and learned as much from it as I did. I talked to Audrey quite a bit before we had this interview, and even knowing what she intended to say to some of those questions, she still really got to me. I still feel like I learned a lot from that conversation, and I hope you did too. My big takeaway is that to be an ally, I have to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. So often, those of us who are cisgendered, those of us who are white, those of us who are straight, we get really good at putting that discomfort on other people. I told that story that you just heard about how my friends and I would do that in college. And the one thing that I think that interview really taught me is that I need to get used to being uncomfortable. And if we want to create the change that we're working for, that discomfort is going to have to be common, because that's the only way we can grow. It's the only way we can change. It's the only way we can improve. Thanks so much for joining us. I'll see you next week.